Thank you, Peter. Thank you, panel. And opa, whoever broke that glass, that was exciting. So Idwal, as we know, is a leader in vessel inspection. They've done an amazing job of bringing data they've accrued as a result of that and sharing it with us to get insight on markets. Now we have George Haysom, CCO of Idwal, who's going to talk about data-led decisions in ship finance and S&P. George?
Thanks very much, Mike, and it's great to be back here in New York. Lots of friendly and familiar faces. Nice to see a lot of you. And today I'm going to be talking not just about ship inspections. I think a lot of people know Idwal as the ship inspection provider. We talk a lot about data. It's there in all of our branding, etc. But what I actually want to talk about is what that data means and how it can help with decision making in the sale and purchase markets, in the financing markets. You know, I'm conscious that in the room we've got buyers, we've got lenders, we've got holders, owners, we've got sellers of tonnage. And really what I want to talk about is that there's lots of ways to use data on the commercial side, but there aren't many ways to use data on the technical side. So what is the context of the environment that we are operating in today? I'm sure everyone here agrees that timelines on everything are very much compressed nowadays. We need to make more accurate decisions more quickly. We face volatile markets, certainly at the moment. There's more ESG pressures coming in with Poseidon Principles, with Basel IV, with EU ETS, CII. All of these new aspects are coming in, and more on governance. And then when it comes to the technical side, we are still largely relying on experienced chief engineers and master mariners who have gut instinct and can tell you about an asset specifically, but they can't lever that, or lever as I can say in this part of the world. They can't lever that information and that data. They can just take their gut instinct. It's not to be derogatory to the professions. They're critical, and I'm sure everyone here agrees with that. We've got plenty of them within Idwal. But really what is important is if you're going to go for data, you need to escalate that up from just the asset. So when it comes to commercial decision making, you can look at FFAs, you can look at freight indexes, you've got depreciation models, but there's nothing on the technical side. So what I want to do is to start talking about how you can create clarity with data. And it starts with the most obvious thing, you've got to collect it. And whilst that might sound ridiculous, a lot of people are still not collecting any form of data. They've got it, but they're not collecting it. So you've got to collect it. Then you've got to structure it. And if you do that from the start, it's a lot easier. So if you create silos in which that data will sit, it allows you to benchmark it, to trend it, etc. You've then got to be able to derive from the data. So that requires building machine learning, building platforms where you can actually see the information that that data is spitting out, and for people to interrogate that data as well. Moving on from that, you go towards machine learning and the ability to estimate data, and then finally, you can use it to predict, okay? And for the context of today, the aim is ultimately to know how an asset compares to its peers, if we bring it back to shipping. So at this point, I will talk specifically about Idwal because it makes it a lot easier for me to explain why I'm saying this. So firstly, if we talk about the amount of data Idwal has, which is structured and is accessible now. So last year, of all of the ships which changed hands, just over 50, I think it was 50.4% of IMO numbers that change hands had an Idwal sale and purchase inspection report associated with them. Since 2019, when the Idwal grade was introduced, we have been on board more than 12,000 unique ships. We've done many more inspections, but unique IMO numbers is 12,000, and that represents more than 15% of the world fleet. So in our data warehouse, as we call it, we have a catalog set of over 10 million data points. And that allows us to do things with data on 4 levels, if you like. So that's how we see it within Idwal. At level 1, you have the inspection data. That's what we actually get directly from the inspection. That's photos, the checklist, etc. At level 2, it's what we derive from using the data of those inspections. And I'll go into a bit more detail on that shortly. At level 3, it's market data. So that's when you start comparing an asset and the output of one inspection against the output of other inspections. And then level 4 is what we call AI data. And that's effectively the ability to estimate grading on ships and to have things like predictive maintenance and estimation models. So what is derived data? Derived data is, for example, the Idwal grade and the subgrades. So that's not just from the inspection, it's taking the information from the inspection and then boiling that up through an algorithm that we use to generate an overall grade, 2 key subgrades on condition and management, and then 21 subgrades which range from things like forthcoming regulatory compliance, crew welfare, hull, etc. And its deficiencies as well. So on average, we will generate around 20 deficiencies per inspection. Again, that's not just from the inspection, it's doing the inspection, bubbling that up, going through a QA review, and then it becomes this sort of second level of data. So market data, this is when you start to look at things in a more 3D way. So an example of market data in the top left here is how a fleet of ships compares to industry average. Moving one in, it's how a fleet of ships compare to industry average at subgrade level. So you can see the deviance of my 2015 built bulk carriers on hull condition to other 2015 built bulk carriers in China, for example. There's deficiency distributions, there's even down to percentage of vessels with cabin facilities, etc. We can break all of that down because we structured the data at source. And then there's some quite interesting metrics like the performance of classification societies by grade, or one very relevant in the room is what's happening in the sale and purchase markets. So because we do more than 50% of all S&P inspections, and a lot of the time we're acting on the sell side, we start to see that, for example, actually this is older data that we use here for January 23, but we're seeing a similar thing. There is a decline in bulk carrier requests for inspections at the moment, and we're seeing container ships rising, which gives us a steer that the container ship market is going to start seeing more activity, certainly on the sell side. So that's the market data, and then we move to the AI data, which is our ability to estimate, in the first instance, to estimate grading of ships. So I talked about that 15% of the world fleet, but when it comes to bulk carriers, for example, it's actually 23% of all the bulk carriers on the water that we've been on board. And there's some figures for the different asset classes, the main asset classes there. So using that allows us to be able to estimate an Idwal grade for ships we have not been on board. So how are we doing that? We're taking into account performance of the ship manager, the DOC holder. We're taking into account performance of the shipyard, the age of ship, the dead weight of the ship. And then there's some external data sources such as port state control, which also play into the algorithm as well to predict the grade. Now, what I'd just sort of like to add in is we can do that and we can do it now. We've built a platform where people can do it. So Idwal have got a stand through in the drinks area. Please do come up to us if you're interested. Give us an IMO or a vessel name, and we can look it up, and we can either give you an inspected grade if that ship has been inspected by us and the client has verified the grade and put it into the market, or if not, we can give you an estimated grade on pretty much any IMO number. So please come and test us. We'd like to do that. So if I then put this into practice, how does it work? What I've tried to do here is sort of map out the life cycle for both an owner and a financier. So it starts with screening the ship, okay? So let's say thinking, should I finance this ship? Should I buy this ship? Before going and inspecting it or getting a report, maybe first you screen it, you see the grade, and you think, okay, I can see how that compares to industry average. I'm interested in this ship. Stage 2 is to inspect it. That could be doing a pre-purchase or a pre-finance inspection, or, and I'll come to this later, it could be that the seller has already done an inspection, so purchasing a copy of that report for legal reliance. So you've got the ship into ownership or into your portfolio as a financier. So then you need to monitor that ship, either through inspecting on a more granular basis as an owner, or maybe from a financier's perspective, you might start looking at the estimated grade performance so that you can select a certain, let's say the bottom 10% of your fleet you will inspect. It's interesting, today we still have quite a few financiers who will choose ships based on office allocations or this sort of thing, and you think there's no real rhyme or reason behind it. So this is how data can bring clarity into the decision-making process. So you monitor your portfolio or your fleet, you then move on to improving it and using the data to improve. So that is things like predictive maintenance, seeing what the recurring themes are, seeing maybe that one ship manager is underperforming in a specific area, using the data, using AI to spit out from the data. And then finally, you come to selling. So when you're selling the ship, you can do a pre-sale inspection, and if it's all gone right, you've got this sort of Japanese Kaizen sort of continuous improvement type philosophy, where you've bought the ship in, you've improved it relative to its age, to be clear, and then you're disposing of the asset afterwards. If you think about it, this cycle can also have effects on neighboring areas of the industry. So, for example, charterers having access to the information on asset condition, hull and machinery, P&I looking at their claims record in comparison to the grading of the assets, etc. So I'll quickly give two examples. Being in the US, I thought I'd pick one of our clients who are a US and European listed owner. They've got a fleet of over 100 ships spread across 5 different technical managers. So how do we work with them? Firstly, we do pre-purchase inspections, or they buy copies of Idwal reports as a pre-sale. So they've got data on that ship, having screened it from the very start. We then monitor the ships for them with physical inspections. As I say, as an owner, it's a little bit more granular. So we monitor the ships for them, and then they manage the defects through the Idwal platform effectively. So they're able to share the defects we find with the ship managers, for the ship managers to provide supporting evidence and close them out. They then use our data to KPI their managers, how quickly they're closing out, etc. And then we present at their annual managers conference. We present for them on trends that we're finding across those managers. And they're using this data in their board packs as well to show how their technical performance is across the fleet. And then when they come to sell, they use our pre-sale to dispose of the assets. Now, this is a particularly large owner. I chose it because it's US listed, but this is transferable across asset types, across geographies, etc. So we're doing this for the likes of NS United in Japan, Pan Ocean in Korea, in the container sector with CMA CGM, with PIL, and we're also doing it for 10, 15 ship owners as well. So it's scalable and transferable across different asset classes and different owners, different geographies, different sizes, etc. If we come to a financier use case, we have a US and European alternative financier we work for. They've got over 5 billion invested, and that's debt and equity. And for them, they use us for screening vessels prior to pre-finance. And they're looking at things like the port state control history. We've got some sanctions, compliance data in the platform as well. And then they're screening the fleet on a regular basis to monitor. So they're not physically inspecting necessarily, they're screening which ships they should be inspecting. So they're using data for clarity behind that. Once that's done, they will choose which ships to inspect, and then we'll go and inspect them, and then they get the data set, and they can share back to the owner the defects, and the owner can close out the defects. Why is this relevant? Well, ultimately, in the event of a default, they're protecting the residual asset value or the asset valuation, but also charter downtime affects both the owner, but also the financier, as many in the room know, because if they're not earning charter, it's harder for them to pay down the debt. So vessel condition is going to mean that you're going to stay on hire longer and better. So it's been a canter through how we see data and the ability to use data for clarity. Put very simply, I guess what I'm trying to say is you go from an inspector or a surveyor to a data set which I consider to be in a 2D basis, i.e. the grading, and then you end up with a 3D view across a fleet. The bit which I couldn't really depict is all of the estimated stuff, but that's the fourth stage, and that's where it goes from there. Hopefully this has been of interest. As I say, it's been a quick canter through, but what I'd like to say is if anyone would like to come and ask questions to find out, we'd be very happy to talk to you, and if you've got an IMO number for us to look at, we'd be pleased to do it. Thank you very much.